Friends, please be seated. So every once in a while we get these teachings, right, from one of the writers of the Gospels. And in textual criticism, we call what we have today a textual or a story or a parable sandwich, right? We have the buns, if you will, or the bread, which is the kind of larger contextual story, which would be the story of Jairus and his little daughter who's dying. But then sandwiched there in the middle is perhaps one of the more important points of this whole pericope. If you will, it's the meat. It is a textual tool that allows the author to teach and then insert inside of the teaching a more important teaching, let's say, or something that at least the author wants us to get, wants us to understand, and that's what we call the meat. And the meat is this woman who has been bleeding for 12 years. This woman who is desperate. This woman who has tried everything. She has spent every last penny. She has endured much under many physicians, but she's only getting worse. And as we have talked about many times before, we're talking about a 2,000-year-old text. And along with that, we have to remember the context, cultural, historical, and religious context that these stories happen in. And it is really important for us today because this woman is seen as ritually unclean. Now, we've heard that a lot, but let's just dial that in a little. This woman has been ultimately othered. This woman has been put out of her family. She is not welcome in her home. She is not welcome in the synagogue. She is not welcome in worship. She's not welcome anywhere. Nobody wants to touch her. Not because of what she has done, not because of who she is or because of the content of her character, but because she has been deemed ritually unclean, because she is bleeding and it won't stop. Now, as Lynn Malfatti pointed out as a nurse, she said this would have caused this woman to be exhausted. Right? Yeah, I can see the women going, She's exhausted in her body. She is depleted. And that has nothing to say about her spiritual, herself, her soul, the mental anguish that she has bared. And so she's put out. And she had heard about Jesus, this itinerant preacher who goes from village to village, and she's heard he's healing people. She probably had just heard because he had just healed a demoniac, a guy who was possessed by 1,000 demons across the lake. And if he could do for that guy, he could do for me, she thinks. But it's not just that she thinks, oh, he can heal me. There's a reason why she believes what she believes about him. But we'll get to that in just a minute. Because let's pause there for just one moment. She comes to Jesus and she seeks him out. It's not like she is a beggar or a blind person that we see in other stories where they're just there because they put themselves at the crossroads where they can beg alms and they can ask for a little grace from people who will give them money here and there or give them some food. No, this woman is not allowed to be in those crossroad spaces. She's not allowed in the public square. She is put out all the time, shooed off by family and friends and religious officials. So she goes there by her own volition. She goes there out of her own action. She chooses to insert herself there. She is not there by fate. She is not there because circumstances have just presented themselves, that there's a synchronicity that all of a sudden, whoa, who is this guy? Oh, I can be healed. No, she goes there with purpose. She goes there with intention. Now, everybody knows her. So she has to kind of crawl, right, through the crowd. Now, the crowd is so enormous. And I was talking this morning, it kind of reminds me of, some of you were alive when this was happening, when Bobby Kennedy was running for president in 1968. And he was so popular. He was so beloved. People yearned to be with him. People yearned just to touch him, like he was Elvis or something, right? Because he was in the Poor People's Campaign, and he was preaching good news to the poor and freedom. And people wanted to touch him. And so there's these famous, videos of him in a car, and his aides are holding on to his waist, like for dear life, so that he can be almost horizontal, touching people, and people are dragging him out of the car they would, and he's being pulled in every direction. This is the scene today. And Jesus is surrounded by hundreds of people, and he is just kind of moving, you can only imagine. And people are touching him all around. And this woman, she knows that she's not welcome there, so she has to kind of claw her way through, and she has to crawl to him. And she comes to him. Back to the story now. She came up behind him in the crowd, stealthily, not to be caught, because she would have probably been stoned. Because she thought, if I but touch the hem of his clothes, I will be made well. This woman, desperate, longing, with purpose. She believes something about Jesus. She believes something that others don't in this crowd. And it says, as soon as she touched him, immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she had been healed of her disease. This woman, who has spent every last dime, is no longer welcome in her home, with her family, with her community, in her worship, is confident enough to brave being killed, being outcast even more, being beaten. She is willing to brave all of that and put her fear aside, because she's confident in who Jesus is. She is confident in his power to do for her that which she and her physicians and her community and her doctors and her religious people cannot do. She's confident that Jesus can do for her that which no one else, including herself, can do for her. She believes that he has come from God. She believes he is the Messiah. How do we extrapolate that from this pericope? Well, let me give you a little bit of my nerdy biblical self here. We kind of dig into the scripture, into the text. We want to know, she believes that Jesus is the Messiah. Well, how is that possible? Well, the next verse, it says, immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned to the crowd, pressing in on all sides. Think, Bobby Kennedy leaning out and being pulled and pulled and pulled. And he says, who touched my clothes? Say what? What? Who touched my clothes? That's odd. That's odd. And his disciples, with so many people pressing in on him on all sides, his disciples are incredulous. And they say, how can you say, who touched me? There's people all around. There's 50 people touching you at all times. What are you talking about? But Jesus knew. Jesus knew. Someone in the crowd believed he had the power to deliver her from her disease. Someone in the crowd had confidence that the touch of his mere clothing would deliver the healing she needed. Someone in the crowd believed he could do for her that which no one else could do. So why does she believe what she believes? Why she believes is tied to what she believes. Let me say that again. Why she believes what she believes about Jesus is tied to what she believes about Jesus. Malachi is the last prophet of Israel. Comes at the very end of the Hebrew Scriptures, at the Nevi'im, the prophets. 400 years before Jesus, Malachi is making his scene, and in the tradition that spans over 4,000 years of the Hebrew tradition, the last prophet kind of has the last word. And the last word, it would have been on the minds of the people who were living in Jesus' day. His writing is the very last. And this is what he has written. This is Malachi chapter 4, verses 1 through 2. He says, "For behold, the day is coming, burning like a furnace, and all the arrogant." Now, the day that's coming is the day of the Lord, the deliverance of the Lord, right? The jubilee of the Lord, the forgiveness of the Lord, the day that Jesus proclaims in Luke chapter 4 when he unrolls the Isaiah scroll, and he says, "I have come today and fulfill the scriptures, that the poor, the blind, the oppressed, the bleeding, the brokenhearted, the prisoner will be set free. For behold, the day of the Lord is coming, burning like a furnace, and all the arrogant and every evildoer will be like chaff. And the day that is coming will set them ablaze, says the Lord of armies, so that it will leave them neither root nor branches. But for you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in its wings, and you will go forth and frolic like calves from the stall. The Son of Righteousness will come with healing in its wings." That is a reference to the Messiah, the one who is to come. Now, she probably would have been familiar, this woman, with the Hebrew Scriptures. Many people would be, and they would grow up going to synagogue and hearing the teachers of the law reference the law. And so she would also be familiar with the rabbinical tradition of the day, which was that all of the rabbis and all of the men would wear a prayer shawl. And you've seen Orthodox Jews just down the street here at our Chabad on the corner, wearing their traditional prayer shawls as they walk to their services, their Shabbat services on Friday nights. And you'll see coming out from underneath, I don't know, maybe this has something to do with that. Maybe this is the Anglican tradition, taking that tradition. I'm not quite sure. But you'll see their little tassels coming out underneath their clothing. Yes? Are you familiar with that? Okay, you're familiar with that. All right. Well, this is where that comes from. This is Numbers. Numbers. It's found in the Hebrew Scriptures in the Old Testament. Yeah, it's called Numbers. Anyway, chapter 15, verses 37 through 39a. Our prayer book our lectionary doesn't use Numbers very often. It's a little dry. But here's a really salient part. The Lord also spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel and tell them that they shall make for themselves tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and that they shall put on the tassel of each corner a cord of blue. It shall be a tassel for you to look at and remember all the commandments of the Lord, to have confidence in the Lord." Okay, so the corners of the prayer shawl, the corners are called the kanaf. Kanaf. Okay? And these little tassels at the ends of the corners that come out that you might see, that have little knots in them, they're called the tzitzi. We should say that together. Tzitzi. Tzitzi. Yeah, okay, that's good. Good enough. Good enough for a bunch of goyim. Okay, that's good. So, the word kanaf in Hebrew has, as Hebrew words have, many meanings. One of the meanings for this word kanaf, which is the corners of the prayer shawl, is the word wing. Like the wings of a bird. The wings of a bird. And to this day, all men who are Orthodox Jews wear this prayer shawl with the kanaf, the wings at the corners, with the tzitzi coming out of the wings of their prayer shawl. So for you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in his wings, in his kanaf. Maybe? So that these wings here are the healing kanaf of the prayer shawl that Jesus would be wearing. So Jesus is an observant Jew. He's wearing this prayer shawl. And underneath his tunic, it's poking out. And that's not uncommon. Everybody has one of those. All the men do, right? If you're an observant Jew. But she thinks to herself that Jesus is the Messiah if he is who he says he is, if he is who he shows himself to be and reveals himself to be in his healing, then the Son of Righteousness will have healing in his kanaf, in his wings, in the corners of his prayer shawls, which Jesus would have been wearing. And so what is she doing when she crawls through there and she's thinking, all I need to do is touch the hem of his, right, the thing that would have been sticking out underneath his prayer shawl, or underneath his tunic, his prayer shawl. The healing is in his kanaf. The healing in the kanaf of the Messiah. And what happens when she touches it? Mark says immediately she is healed. And Jesus says, "Go in peace, daughter. Your faith has made you well." Jesus is touched on every side by 50, 100 people. His disciples are incredulous. What are you talking about? Somebody touched you. There's 50 people touching you at all times. What are you talking about? But he knows, because he feels the power go out from him. And the power that goes out from him is responding to the faith, the confidence, the belief that this woman has in her desperation, in her own volition, in the need and longing she has to be whole. And Jesus recognizes that. The power goes out, and he knows somebody here believes, I am who I am. Yesterday, Karen and I went to Bakersfield, of all places. It was only like 106, you know. And we went to celebrate the life of my dear Aunt Sharon, who died back in January, and she was my favorite aunt. And she had a harrowing story of her life, full of pain and sorrow and joy. And they lived side by side in her life and in her body. When she was 16, she was in a terrible car accident, and back then, of course, there were no seatbelts, and she was thrown from the car, and she was paralyzed for life from her waist down. So I only knew my Aunt Sharon as my favorite aunt who, wheeled around in her wheelchair, and then when she had been married to my uncle for a few years, they got pregnant and they had a little girl who happened to be about 6 months younger than I was, and her name was Christy. And when she was 14 months old, she was alone with Christy, and Christy wandered off and they had a pool. And she couldn't save her. She goes on, she has 3 beautiful boys and a blessed life. A life full of pain. Physical pain that she had from the phantom pain that she had all of her life. And the soul pain of having lost a child and lost her legs and her mobility. But she was the most joyful person. She knew that weeping may stay the night, but joy comes in the morning. She had a faith. She didn't talk about it all the time, but it was ever present. It was an energy that she had. When you were in the room with her and she hadn't seen you for a while, you were the only person in the room. And she was physical too. Like if she had been able to walk, she would have been all up, like hugging and squeezing and picking up but she would grab me. She'd pull me close to her in her chair. She'd kiss my cheeks and she'd kiss my hands and she'd hold my hands in her hands and she'd look right into my eyes and she'd always say, "Tell me everything. Tell me what's going on with you. Tell me about your speech and debate. Tell me about your theater. Tell me what's going on with you." Nobody else was in the room. Joy is what we've been talking about for 8 weeks now. Joy in the face of simultaneous brokenheartedness. Joy in the face of sorrow that won't quit. Joy that is confidence in God's love and care. Joy that we might understand as Sharon understood, and as this woman who formerly bled for 12 years but was freed because of her faith. That joy is the unceasing sense of well-being, no matter what comes. Joy or pain, sorrow, confidence in God's goodness. Now, we all know people who, despite their sorrow and despite the circumstances, they wear the burdens of life so lightly, so gracefully. Because weeping may stay the night, but joy comes in the morning. And I want to leave you with these 2 thoughts. Confidence in God. Confidence comes from a Latin word. It means confide, with faith. It means literally acting with faith. This is from Dallas Willard's fantastic book on joy. It's called Life Without Lack. And we've had a class here about it. We've read it together. If you have not read it, read it this summer. Life Without Lack. Joy brings with it confidence, he says. It is, in fact, mainly a matter of confidence. It is not some kind of super ecstatic state. Joy is a pervasive sense of well-being that claims your entire body, whether it's bleeding or diseased or paralyzed. It claims your entire soul, physical, non-physical side of the human self. Joy comes naturally when we are confident about who we are and what we are doing in God. To be with Jesus is to have both. Confidence about who we are and what we're doing. I leave you with the poem that inspires today's recessional hymn, our last hymn. It's not one that we do here very often, but it is glorious. And it is by a Scottish poet named Henry Francis Lyte, Lyte, and it is called Abide With Me. It has been known as Mahatma Gandhi's favorite Christian hymn. Abide with me, fast falls the eventide. The darkness deepens, Lord, with me abide. When other helpers fail and comforts flee, help of the helpless, oh, abide with me. Swift to its close ebbs out life's little day, earth's joys grow dim, its glories pass away. Change and decay in all around I see, O thou who changest not, abide with me. Come not in terror as the King of Kings, but kind and good, with healing in thy wings. Tears for all woes, a heart for every plea. Come, friend of sinners, thus abide with me. Thou on my head in early youth didst smile, and though rebellious and perverse meanwhile, thou hast not left me oft as I left thee. On to the close, O Lord, abide with me. I need thy presence every passing hour. What but thy grace can foil the tempter's power? Who like thyself my guide and stay can be? Through cloud and sunshine, Lord, abide with me. I fear no foe, with thee at hand to bless. Ills have no weight and tears no bitterness. Where is death's sting? Where, grave, thy victory? I triumph still if thou abide with me. Hold thou thy cross before my closing eyes. Shine through the gloom and point me to the skies. Heaven's morning breaks and earth's vain shadows flee. In life, in death, O Lord, say it with me, abide with me. May God abide with you, and may you abide in God. May you have confidence in God's love and God's power to heal. And though you may weep this night, may you have faith that joy comes in the morning. And all of God's people said,